Well, good evening. It's wonderful that you ventured out tonight in the midst of this snow to come and join us here for tonight's lecture. The only thing I can say is it's even braver of our guest to venture out, having arrived last evening from Pasadena, where the temperature yesterday was 82 degrees. So he came off the plane last night, and there was a bit of not just culture shock, but temperature shock for him. So we've been coping with that today. So I do want to welcome you. This is a lecture series. Tonight's lecture and tomorrow, the two lectures and the chapel service are part of a Earl Robinson Memorial Lecture Series, which was established by an endowment from the Salvation Army in Canada in memory of Colonel Earl Robinson. Colonel Robinson was instrumental in the establishment of this institution. In 1981, he and his wife Benita were appointed to Winnipeg to do the groundwork to establish a Salvation Army Bible College at the time in Winnipeg. And then in June of 1982, Earl was appointed as the first president of Catherine Booth Bible College, as it was at that time. He served in that role from 1982 to 1993, and then went on from here in his various appointments as a Salvation Army officer to do some significant work, particularly internationally, with the Salvation Army's International Doctrine Council, and then as the Salvation Army's international representative to a number of ecumenical bodies, including the World Council of Churches and the World Evangelical Fellowship. So when Earl was promoted to glory in 2012, the Salvation Army in this territory decided to remember him and his contributions, not only to the establishment of Booth University College, but his contributions to the Salvation Army in Canada, but also internationally, by establishing this lecture series. This is the second time we've had this lecture series. Our first Robinson lecturer, was Dr. Paul Chilcote, who was here 2.5 years ago, and tonight we're happy to welcome Dr. Joel Green. I'm going to invite Dr. Roy Giel from our faculty to come and introduce Dr. Green this evening. Roy.
Well, it's wonderful to have Professor Joel B. Green as the Robinson Lecturer. Dr. Green is, since 2007, Professor of New Testament Interpretation and Dean of the School of Theology at Fuller Theological Seminary. In biblical studies, we've been aware of Dr. Green's work as a scholar for many years, and here at Booth University College, we have required students, in some courses at least, to read some of Dr. Green's books, such as, for example, Introducing the New Testament, its Literature and Theology, which was co-written with Paul Achtemeier and Marianne May Thompson, 2001, and his commentary, The Gospel According to Luke, in the New International Commentary of the New Testament series from 1997. While I've seen Dr. Green from a distance a number of times at conferences, most recently at the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting in Atlanta, it's now an honor to meet him face to face and to be able to listen to and interact with him. Dr. Green's academic and scholarly work is striking in its scope, depth, and accessibility. He's published more than 40 books and more articles and presentations than I could take time to count. The word prolific seems inadequate to describe him and his writing. I hope he does not mind me saying that it is not often that one sees a curriculum vitae of 43 pages. Prior to being a teacher and administrator at Fuller, Professor Green was professor, dean, and vice president at Asbury Seminary, and a faculty member at academic institutions in California. He teaches a range of courses from Introduction to the New Testament to Exegetical Method to the exegesis of Luke, the Acts of the Apostles, and 1 Peter, to advanced Greek exegesis, and to the intriguingly titled The Human Person in New Testament Perspective. He is a specialist in the interpretation of Luke, Acts, James, 1 Peter, and the interconnections of science and theology. Professor Green's PhD is from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, where he studied with the very well-known, much loved, and now deeply lamented New Testament scholar Howard Marshall. He is editor of the New International Commentary of the New Testament series, co-editor of the Two Horizons Commentary series, series editor of Reframing New Testament Theology, and several other series. His most recent publications include, such as the following: Conversion in Luke Acts, Divine Action, Human Cognition, and the People of God, 2015. Why Salvation, 2013. Ears That Hear, Explorations in Theological Interpretation of the Bible, co-edited with Tim Meadowcroft in 2013. Salvationists present here tonight will be interested to know that Dr. Green is a Methodist elder, preacher, and teacher who has studied and written about John Wesley and Wesleyans and the Wesleyan movement, notably in his books Wesley, Wesleyans, and Reading the Bible as Scripture, and Reading Scripture as Wesleyans. He is co-editor of the Wesley Study Bible. Besides his scholarly work, Dr. Green is an administrator who leads admirably now at Fuller and has done so previously at other institutions. He has had leadership roles in the Society of Biblical Literature and other scholarly societies and fellowships. I would like to point out, too, that he is a scholar and teacher of the church. He is deeply committed to ecclesial and pastoral concerns. He wishes to communicate what he learns as an academic scholar to all of God's people. One of Professor Green's major interests, and I think this has led us in part to this series of lecture, and perhaps he will tell us perhaps to what we might hear about this evening, is neuroscience, cognitive theory, and the interface of science and theology. He has done graduate studies in neuroanatomy and neuroscience. These areas of study inform his reading and interpretation of the New Testament. May I just now say, Professor Green, that you are an encouragement to scholarship and to faithfulness. We thank you for coming, and we welcome you to Booth University College as the Robinson Lecturer with your presentation, Neural or Sacred Minds, Souls, and Humans. We thank God for your work, and we are listening and ready to learn.
Well, thank you very much. I wish my mother had been here to hear all of those things. That was remarkable. It's a delight to be here, even if it's colder than I've been in a long time. I can't remember, actually. And I hear it's even worse this evening. I tried to get my wife, Pam, to come with me on this trip. And she said, maybe you can go back in July or something. Some other time other than 39 below zero. It's wonderful to be here and to have a conversation with you. I want to work some in the next couple of days at the interface of Scripture and theology, and to some degree the natural sciences, the science part coming especially this evening. Tomorrow morning, I'll be preaching on Luke 13, the story of the woman bent over, Luke 13, 10 to 17, and trying to suggest some things about what's going on in that story that help us understand the mission of the church. After lunch, I'll be talking about health and healing, developing even further some of those comments and suggestions around what it means to be involved in the mission of the church around health and healing. And then tomorrow evening, looking especially at conversion. All of this will be related to the question that I want to raise this evening, namely, what does it mean to be human? Because what it means to be human actually grounds a good bit of how we understand what it means to be involved in mission in North America or around the world in the early 21st century. I know this doesn't happen in the Army, but it does happen sometimes in United Methodist churches when councils gather, there are arguments, debates. How do we spend money? What do we prioritize? I've often thought to myself as I've listened to and participated in those conversations that what we're really dealing with here, without saying so, is different views of what it means to be human. Different understandings of theological anthropology, if you will. Different understandings of what it means to fulfill the vocation of being human in the world God has created. Nevertheless, I admit that the question, what does it mean to be human, is one that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. Those are what my parents would call leisurely questions. Questions that most people don't have time to think about because of the press of life, the press of responsibilities. They would say things like this: you need to get on with life and quit all of this navel-gazing about what humans are. And the truth is, Scripture doesn't spend a lot of time, or at least a lot of explicit time, attending to the question, what does it mean to be human? The result is, there's a kind of default answer to the question, and that is, humans are known by their souls. The impulses for this are easy to explain. Those of us who've had the experience of, as it were, sitting on our own shoulders and looking over what we're doing, thinking about how we'll respond, the idea of self-reflection presses for an understanding that somehow transcends the material. It's hard to think about the color purple or the experience of joy being tied down to things that are material, like neurons. For thousands of years, humans have thought of themselves as consisting of parts, in part because of the widespread experience of being out of the body. Typically, brief episodes in which a person's consciousness seems to take leave of the body and to look back on the body as though it belonged to someone else. These experiences are surprisingly common. Some people think that 10% of the general population has had some kind of out-of-body experience. What I find fascinating is that they also suggest that 25% of all students have had out-of-body experiences. Not sure what to think about that last statistic. It's also true, I think, that we can go to literature and film in order to get a sense of the struggle over what it means to be human. Let me give you some examples. Those of us who have encountered Mary Shelley's monster, that hideous phantasm of a man, the creation of Victor Frankenstein, we might have wondered if humans were simply the sum of a bunch of body parts animated by a powerful electrical charge. Or if we go to Data, that android bridge officer from television's Star Trek, The Next Generation. He's consumed by his yearning to become human. But of course, that raises the question, doesn't it? What does it mean to be human? In the episode, The Measure of a Man, Captain Picard persuades a court of law of Data's right to self-determination. In the episode entitled The Offspring, Data creates a daughter by mapping his own neural nets onto an android body, proving his ability to produce, reproduce. Eventually, he receives an emotion chip, and in the movie Star Trek First Contact, he's given patches of human skin. Do those attributes mean that Data is moving closer to being human? And then Robin Williams plays model NPR 114, called Andrew, after a little girl pronounces android in the movie Bicentennial Man. Repeatedly we hear, he's not a person, he's a piece of property. And yet he spends his early years in a home whose inhabitants are told that he is to be treated as if he were a person, where he expresses creativity, curiosity, and friendship, and develops a love of the arts. We're repeatedly reminded that he's a machine, and yet he opens a bank account, clothes himself, speaks of himself in the first person, builds a home, owns a dog, and utilizes his freedom in the service of a bicentennial quest for family. Faced with evidence that he's in the process of becoming, learning, and growing all the time, again and again the film struggles with the question, what does it mean to be human? Is participation in the human gene pool the decisive factor? Humans have a heart, we learn, but when Andrew evidences his capacity for heartfelt commitment, he is still denied human status. A court in San Francisco rules that he is a robot, not a human, because he's immortal. He doesn't share in the human quality of frailty and finitude. Over time, he undergoes a progressive transition from mechanical to biological existence. So finally, at age 200, he's on his deathbed, and he breathes his last just before the World Congress acknowledges his humanity. But the Congress never tells us why they regard him as human. As his life partner drifts toward her own death, she whispers to him, "See you soon." Does that mean that the movie's trying to suggest that an android will participate in some form of afterlife? In Steven Spielberg's movie AI, released about 15 years ago, a youthful robot exhibits such qualities as relational bonding and self-care to the degree that he evokes love and care from human beings. Does that make him human? And even Tolkien's Lord of the Rings presses questions of a similar sort because, as we read elsewhere, orcs and elves represent the lowest and the highest reaches of human beings. What does it mean to be human is not only an issue for literature and movies. When Aunt Jenny loses herself in the dark caverns of dementia, or when little Joey is riding a bicycle and struck by a car and now lives in a persistent vegetative state, are they still human beings? Abortion and other beginning-of-life issues, as well as struggles to define death, end-of-life issues, they similarly press for answers to the question, what does it mean to be human? Interestingly, the natural sciences challenge us also. Some 98% of our DNA is shared with chimpanzees. Decision-making is credited to all kinds of animals, suggesting the capacity in all kinds of animals for some measure of free will. There's evidence of consciousness in cats. Science tells us that, but my wife would have told us that long ago. And dogs. And even fish, apparently. The capacities we've come to associate with being human are, we discover, grounded in biological processes, consistency of memory, learning, the development of consciousness, individuality within community, including empathy and other aspects of relationality. The capacity to make decisions, planning and action on the basis of that decision, taking responsibility for decisions and actions. When all of these capacities are shown to have a neural basis, then the question becomes, what's a soul for? Or to put it differently, what's the soul to do? The bottom line is that the ground is shifting. Traditional views have tended to locate humans in a place of uncontestable honor at the center of the cosmos. Such views have been humbled by scientific advance in the modern age. First by Galileo and Copernicus, who demonstrated that our planet and thus we who inhabit the earth are not the center around which the universe turns. And then by Darwin and evolutionary biology, who located Homo sapiens within the world of animals with a genetic makeup that strongly resembles the creatures around us. The most recent challenge comes from the neurosciences, with its tightening of the mind-brain link. Human attitudes and behavior are increasingly regarded as the outcome of the complex and generative interplay of genetics and especially relational experiences. The resulting portrait of human personhood, impinges on Christian thought, especially at 2 points. First, from a neuroscientific perspective, it's unnecessary to postulate a second metaphysical entity, such as the soul or spirit, to account for human capacities or distinctives. And second, at the level of molecular biology, any meaningful distinction between human beings and other animals is impossible to maintain. When it comes to voices from the academic crowd, we can turn to 2 examples. One, a blockbuster book published 20 years ago, Francis Crick, The Astonishing Hypothesis, the Scientific Search for the Soul. Crick wrote, "You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, all of these are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules." Crick writes a chapter in his book about going to Sunday school, meaning going to science class. He's traded Christian religion and other religions for the religion of science. Another example, less strange in its approach, is Thomas Metzinger, who writes that there is an image of man emerging, an image that will dramatically contradict almost all traditional images man has made of himself in the course of his cultural history. A radically new understanding of what it means to be human. Conclusions like this, considerations like this, raise a number of potentially unsettling questions. Is there anything about humans that our mechanical creations, our innovations in our artificial intelligence, will be unable to duplicate? What view of the human person is capable of supporting what we want to know about ourselves theologically? About sin, for example, as well as moral responsibility, repentance, and growth in grace. Am I free to do what I want, or is my sense of decision-making a ruse? What portion of the human person is necessary for discourse concerning morality and for ethical practices? If humans, like sheep, can be cloned, will the resulting life form be a person? How should we understand salvation? Does salvation entail a denial of the world, a denial of embodied life, focusing instead on my heart, on my inner person, and on the life to come? How ought the church to be extending itself in mission? Mission to what? The spiritual and soulish needs of a person? Society at large? The cosmos? What happens when we die? What view of the human person is consistent with Christian belief in life after death? Here's what I want to do in the time we have this evening. I want to first of all focus for a few minutes on some innovations in neuroscience that press on some of the questions I've been asking. I want then to turn to some considerations from Scripture. And then finally, I want to raise a number of important questions, consequences of these considerations. What you'll notice as we go through this evening is the degree to which the relationship between science and biblical faith is marked less by conflict and more by convergence, as the results either way press in similar directions. First, then, some innovations in neuroscience. I want to start with 17th century science, which removed the soul from scientific inquiry, focusing instead on the brain. We start with Thomas Willis, who lived in the 17th century. He's the person who actually coined the term neurology. In his books, he distinguished between two souls, the souls of roots, sometimes the souls of animals, he would call them, and then the rational soul. On the one hand, a material soul characteristic of both humans and non-human animals, and another soul, a further soul, immaterial and immortal, found alone in humans. Now, in his work, he first acknowledges an immortal soul and then devotes himself at length to the function and properties of the soul of brutes. The result is that he begins to study what we might now call localization, that is, identifying the neural substrates of various human capacities. Where is memory found in the brain? Where is emotion? Where is decision-making, and so on. In the hands of Thomas Willis, already in the 17th century, the immaterial soul seemed to be taking on flesh. And since then, for some 350 years, scientists like Thomas Willis have shown that the properties the Christian tradition has tended to associate with the soul have a neural substrate. That is, they are properties, functions of the brain. Recent study underscores the tight relationship between body and mind. For example, with respect to moral reasoning, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, has been used to identify those regions of the brain that play a central role in the moral appraisal in humans, demonstrating again and again a neural substrate for the emotions by which we assign value to events, objects, and actions. We have evidence that communicative interaction between people is signaled by the activation of two common brain regions that are also activated when people are asked to consider the mental states of other people. Again, study identifying the area of the brain implicated in monitoring the consequences of one's actions has completed its work. In the area of spirituality, a number of people have been doing research, perhaps none more than Andrew Newberg and his colleagues, who conducted several related studies. First, a single photon emission computed tomography study, SPECT, demonstrating changes in cerebral activity during episodes of tongue-speaking, glossolalia. A similar SPECT study, a brain imaging accomplished among accomplished Tibetan Buddhist meditators, that yielded results suggesting the blocking of selected parts of the brain during profound unitary states. That is, the feeling of timelessness and spacelessness, the loss of a differentiated sense of self, that among Christians would be experienced as a form of mystical union with God, but among Buddhists would be experienced non-personally as nirvana. Again, a SPECT study measuring cerebral blood flow in Franciscan nuns in meditative prayer that displayed increased activity in certain parts of the brain with changes in the prefrontal cortex reflecting an altered state of body consciousness during prayer. Similarly, Mario Beauregard and Vincent Paquette reported on their functional magnetic resonance imaging study, fMRI, a study of 15 cloistered Carmelite nuns while they were subjectively in a state of union with God. They were looking for a God spot, a God region in the brain. But they discovered that there was no such thing, that this kind of activity, in this case prayer, activated dozens of different brain regions during mystical experience. These kinds of studies, whatever else they say, point clearly to the neurobiological substrate of religious experience. And thirdly, psychotherapy. In order to examine whether psychological therapies modulate brain activity, one recent survey of research examined psychiatric research that utilized neuroimaging techniques to investigate neural events associated with both therapeutic and drug-related interventions in a number of psychiatric disorders like phobia, panic disorder, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and schizophrenia. According to the empirical research survey, clinical improvements were correlated with regional and/or system change in the brain, leading to the conclusion that these interventions, these therapeutic interventions, did in fact cultivate changes at the brain level. There are a number of consequences to which we might draw attention, but let me mention two. First, according to these kinds of studies, who we are can never be divided into parts. To speak, for example, of conversion, or more basically, to speak of moral formation, is always to speak of persons and not of parts of persons. Transformation of my inner self can be nothing more than transformation of me, understood holistically. Or, to put it more bluntly, there can be no formation or transformation that is not fully embodied. Secondly, if the neurobiological systems that shape how we think, feel, believe, and behave are forever being formed in the context of our social experiences, then in a profound sense, we can speak of personal formation and personal transformation only in relational terms. Our autobiographical selves are formed within a nest of relationships within a community. The effects, in fact, are far-reaching. They call into question widespread beliefs about what it means to be human. They call into question, for example, the way many of us conceive of the mind-soul as an ontologically distinct entity. They call into question our limited view of body, deriving from Descartes, hydraulics, mechanics, deterministic, expressed sometimes in the phrase, my genes made me do it. They call into question our locating the properties of the mind-soul beyond the boundaries of investigation and inquiry. They call into question the way so many of us tend to narrow too much our definitions of healing and health, using only biomedical terms. And the related view among some that psychological concerns must not be real. And in the church, of course, the question is, what is the object of the church's mission? Is it, in fact, saving souls? Or must it be understood in a more broad sense? I turned into the question, what about Scripture? Surprisingly, the results of neuroscientific exploration and those biblical studies have been on trajectories characterized less by collision and more by convergence. In the case of identifying what it means to be human, the biblical scholar is likely to side more with a neurobiologist than with some of the well-known voices of the Christian tradition. Let me mention why this is so by tracing very briefly 4 lines of evidence. The first, of course, comes from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. In the first century, middle of the first century, Philo, the Alexandrian Jew, followed an interpretive tradition that saw the creation of a soul, then a body. Which is to say, Philo read Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, and then chapter 2 of Genesis from a Platonistic perspective. He found Platonic dualism in Genesis 1. This view is actually missing from New Testament writers, but it was picked up by the early church, which, like Philo, was concerned to show the intellectual appeal of biblical faith in a world saturated by Greek philosophical categories. And so it has been represented by many in the theological tradition by the virtual equation of soul and divine image. What would happen, though, if we revisited this text? How to understand God's image, the divine image of human beings, is the object, of course, of long-standing debate. Though Scripture itself supports views that accord privilege to human capabilities or capacities or vocation, and not so much to human essences or parts. Moreover, according to Genesis 2:7, humans do not possess a soul, but are a soul, in Hebrew, nephesh. Or to translate the Hebrew phrase in a way that actually makes more sense, Adam, the New Revised Standard Version puts it, Adam became a living being. Or the Common English Bible puts it this way: the Lord God formed the human from the topsoil of the fertile land and blew life's breath into his nostrils. The human came to life. According to Genesis 1:30, interestingly, it's not only humans who are soulish in this sense, but so are the beasts of the earth, the birds of the air, and everything that creeps on the earth. Or, like human beings, these are also characterized by nephesh, that is, God's creatures, human and otherwise, all share the breath of life. In short, we cannot identify God's image with the soul. God's image, not the soul, is the distinguishing characteristic of the human family in relationship to the rest of creation. And further, God's image is relationally and vocationally defined, a way to be, a call in our life together as humans, and not so much a way of identifying a certain essence or part of a person. Secondly, what would it mean to read no longer with Cartesian eyes? What I have in mind here is the degree to which our reading of Scripture it can be and often is guided by assumptions that are actually alien to Scripture. What glasses do we put on before we read? That's the question. For Descartes, to understand a human phenomenon, we must first ascertain whether to attribute that phenomenon to the soul or to the body. For him, these are characterized by an essential and a real distinction. Given the importance of the horizons of our own taken for granted assumptions in acts of reading and interpretation, and given the pervasive influence of the Cartesian idea of the disembodied mind even today, it is no surprise that many readers of the Bible have found body-soul dualism in its pages. What we have to do is take seriously the role of the reader in biblical hermeneutics. That is, take seriously the fact that what we bring with us to the text is often what we find in the text. In fact, the Bible speaks best within a tradition and within a community of reading. Let me give one example. It's an example I'll return to tomorrow afternoon. I was thinking of Western medicine, where the Cartesian mind-body split is especially pervasive. Only with slight hyperbole can the Vietnamese astrophysicist Trinh Xuan Thuan remark, quote, "To this day, the brain and mind are regarded as two distinct entities in Western medicine. If I have a headache, I consult a neurologist. If I'm depressed, I consult a psychiatrist." Given this way of structuring reality, why would we not unreflectingly segregate healing, biomedical, from salvation, spiritual? As I want to discuss more fully tomorrow, when it comes to the voice of Scripture on healing, there's actually no room for segregating the human person into discrete parts, constitutive parts, whether bodily or spiritual or communal. Thirdly, we can turn to a lesson in linguistics. That is, we can account for the last century of advances in linguistics that reject the confusion between words and concepts, or, to put it more concretely, reject the confusion of a Greek term like psyche with the concept of soul, and therefore refer to something like an ontological entity separate from the soma, or body. It is true that psyche could refer to the soul in Greek thought, but understood within the framework of a body-soul dualism, this cannot be presumed. After all, Aristotle could devote an entire treatise to the soul, cleverly entitled On the Soul. and yet define suke in terms of what we today would designate a physicalist account of the human person. In the same way that the Greek translation of visual scripture, known as the Septuagint, could typically translate the Hebrew term nephesh, vitality, with the Greek word suke, without thereby introducing anthropological dualism into the Old Testament. In fact, nephesh occurs almost 800 times in the Old Testament, with the primary meaning of gullet or throat, which sounds pretty physical. And with the extended notion of vitality, or the impulse of life against death, when used with reference to human beings, nephesh is typically used with reference to the entire human being and not to some portion of a person. Finally, we can refer to the varieties of ancient perspectives on the philosophy of the mind. We now recognize that the long-standing distinction that posited a dichotomy between Hebrew thought and Greek thought is nothing more than a gross caricature. Greek thought, which affirmed dualism, Hebrew thought, which affirmed some form of monism, one-thingism. That kind of distinction is a gross caricature in the first century. That's because, on the one hand, Greek thought was far more varied on this question than we typically think. It's also true because in the first century world of the New Testament, there was no easy way to distinguish between Greek and Hebrew because one is always dealing with a continuum, more or less Greek, more or less Hebrew, when it comes to Jewish people. Sharply put, there's no singular conception of the soul among the Greeks. The body-soul relationship was variously assessed among philosophers and physicians in that Greek period. In fact, the belief cluster shared by philosophers and physicians of this period had it that the soul was bodily, that the soul is generated with the body, and that neither exists before the body nor separable after the body dies. In other words, the soul does not exist independently of the body in which it exists. The environment within which the New Testament was taking shape provided for the presence of a variety of views, both within the Roman world and in larger Hellenistic or Greek Judaism. For both of these reasons, it is erroneous to allege that the New Testament authors lived in a milieu pervaded by dualism. Considerations of this sort have led New Testament scholars increasingly to do without the word soul. Let me give you some examples. The King James Version, sometimes called the Authorized Version, published in 1611, used the word soul 39 times in the New Testament. The American Standard Version, published in 1901, used the word soul in the New Testament 34 times. The Revised Standard Version, published in 1952, used the word soul in the New Testament 27 times. Are you seeing a trajectory here? The New Revised Standard Version in 1989, 22 times. Today's New International Version, 2001, 20 times. The New American Bible in 2011, 15 times. The Common English Bible in 2011, 3 times. I'm tempted to call this the strange case of the disappearing soul. Apparently, New Testament translators have ceded the term soul to popular usage. And in popular thought, the soul is an immaterial, immortal part of a human. But New Testament scholars have increasingly observed that the Greek term suke is not very well understood in just that way. As a result, the word soul increasingly disappears from our New Testaments. What then about the soul? Why is this an important question? One reason to think about the significance of this question is because of the power answer the question, what does it mean to be saved, will depend a good deal on what we think the problem is. If we begin with a diagnosis that separates individuals into parts, or even individuals from communities, then we will understand salvation or the solution to the problem in similar ways, dealing with humans as parts, or humans one person at a time. Secondly, taking seriously the research done both in the neurosciences and in scripture study affirms what we might have been reading in Genesis 1 and 2 all along, namely, the degree to which the human person and the human family are continuous with creation, not over against creation. Genesis 1 and 2 already distinguishes between God and not God. That is to say, God and what God creates. And so, of course, why would we be surprised to discover that humans share so much with a non-human creature? Thirdly, we would understand, as the Western tradition understands already so well, that when we talk about spiritual formation, we're actually concerned about Christian formation. Not simply the formation of spirits, but the formation of whole people and whole communities in the whole world before the God who created us. Fourthly, we would understand and take seriously that there is nothing about the human person that is intrinsically immortal. One of the most fascinating and stubborn aspects of the Christian tradition is its affirmation of the resurrection of the body. Transformation and immortality are gifts. They are the consequence of resurrection. They are not preparation for resurrection. To put it more bluntly, when people die, they really die. God raises them from the dead. And lastly, and in my mind, perhaps most significantly, when it comes to salvation and the mission of the church, it takes a community. In fact, one of the most surprising aspects of my own graduate work in neuroscience, it would be surprising to my professors to hear me say such things, but one of the most surprising discoveries was the importance of the church. If it is in fact within the community of one's relationships that one is formed and transformed, then the notion of the church becomes all the more significant. One of the problems with neuroscientific investigation for the last several decades is the degree to which it focuses on one brain at a time, one human at a time. The biblical tradition rejects the notion that we can be understood one person at a time, but always has to be understood in relationship to God, in relationship to God's people, in relationship to the world that God created. Or to put it differently, it takes a community to form and to transform human beings. Thank you very much for your attention this evening. Let me see if you have questions that you'd like to raise.
Just so that we get the questions, we'll use a mic.
Are you a materialist?
I didn't quite hear you, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I heard you, I just couldn't break out the word you were using.
Okay, the word I'm using is a metaphysical word,
Say it again.
materialist.
Oh, I'm not materialist, thank you. Yeah. The answer is no. I tend to try to stay away from words like this, in part because I don't think that Scripture speaks with the kind of philosophical nuance that will make people happy today. There are a number of words that I could use: emergence, monism, or deep physicalism, as one person put it. I tend to go for the simple word monism, which allows for a variety of philosophical considerations.
First, Dr. Green, thank you very much. Wanting to see if I make sure I understand, a few months ago, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in Canada produced a documentary based on a psychotherapist who is Canadian. And this, in turn, was based on his book called Wasted. As a psychotherapist, he developed alcoholism, lost his marriage, lost his practice, and was trying to make sense of it all. He went to a number of clinics all around North America, eventually ended up at a clinic in the United States that showed him a brain scan of the impulses or the reaction when he was craving alcohol and took a drink. Now, if I understand you correctly, that's a legitimate investigation. It's just not the whole story.
Exactly. I appreciate the way you put that. It's a legitimate investigation and not the whole story. It's one of the things that AA has understood far longer than a number of people I grew up with in Texas. Namely, do you know AA? 12 steps? Yeah. Well, do you know that what's going on there is a structured, communal, relational, accountable environment that doesn't stop after the first evening or after the first 30 meetings in 30 days or after the first 6 years, et cetera. It's an ongoing relational reformation event. And so on the one hand, yes, it's no surprise that there are neural evidences of the kind of problem that this person had. On the other hand, if we're going to talk about a solution, or if we're going to even talk about understanding the problem, then we have to think about, sorry to do this, biopsychosocial, spiritual reality.
Good evening. Would it be fair to say, I'm trying to understand something you mentioned. Is it fair to say that when the body dies, the soul dies as well? And if that was what you said, can you elaborate on that?
Say that last part.
Sorry. You're saying, if I get you correctly, when the body dies, the soul dies as well. If that's correct in what you said, can you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm not thinking that there's a soul that needs to die. I'm thinking that there's a social, biological, spiritual entity called a human being who dies. And they really die. And so what happens at death is not soul flight, which was thought by some Greek philosophers in the Roman period. But what happens is that people really die, and that in order for there to be a resurrection, there has to be new creation. In other words, God has to do something in order to allow you and me to have coffee in the afterlife. Coffee and books in the afterlife.
Very interesting area that we're going into. Would you associate consciousness as a topic with what you're describing as a monistic being?
Yes, I would, but I would have to add the word emergentism, or when I say monism, emergent monism, something like that allows for the understanding that there's more going on simply than neural pathways. And that's what I mean when I use the word emergentism. In other words, consciousness, as far as I can tell, and I don't do consciousness studies, I just read consciousness studies, there's no place in the brain. There's no part you can carve out and get rid of somebody's consciousness, because one's experience of oneself is actually widely spread throughout the brain. And for that reason, I would in fact be wanting to talk about consciousness as one of the emergent properties of a neural substrate.
Further to that, if resurrection, transformation are gifts, is consciousness part of that gift? And the implied question is, after death, at what point is consciousness restored, or?
Yeah, I wish I could answer your question, and if I could, I'd write a book. And it would sell millions of copies. It's the question of the hour, isn't it? It's not for nothing that Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 puts this under the category of mysterion. It's a mystery. Behold, I show you a mystery. I don't know the answer to your question. I can tell you where I myself come down. This is part of my Wesleyan background. Wesley borrows a notion of time from Boethius. Whether he gets Boethius right, I'll leave it to philosophers to sort out. But he talks about God being at all times. Now, if that's the case, then the way that we experience time, moving from left to right, time keeps on ticking into the future, is not the way God experiences time. God is in all times, and therefore sees all time at once. If that's the case, and if at death I am with God, then I would say that my eternal life begins at the moment of my death, which is not experienced the same way that it would be in this world. But it depends on how you view time as to how you think about such things, and that's the way that I see it.
Thank you.
I don't know that I need the mic.
I think they're trying to get a recording.
Or are they trying, well, then it could be edited out. It could,
Maybe
you're editing out worthless questions? No, you want to leave worthless questions in. I think something, not to suppose that I know what my brother was getting at in terms of is death, sort of death, the end for human beings, so you say it is. But part, I think, of the challenge as I read Scripture is that it supposes not necessarily of human beings, but of others, say God, that it is possible to have personal attributes without bodily attributes. So if that's possible for God, it would be interesting to know, so far as I know, there's no neural substrate for the consciousness of God that emerges. That is, creation is presented as consequent to God, not coterminous with God. So I think that the idea is if Scripture presents God as having inherently personal attributes, consciousness and so on, decision-making, without having body, is it at least not possible to have a reading of Scripture that is different from yours and, say, amongst others, a dualistic reading?
Oh, yeah. So, you asked me a question of a biblical scholar, is it possible? The answer is always yes. Is it probable?
So it should be maybe that it went from 27 instances to 45 from the King James Version to the, yeah.
Well, naturally, you'll know from what I've already said that I wouldn't go the direction you just went, right? One of the things that happens in 1 Corinthians, for example, is that the word body so much shows up repeatedly. Obviously, bodily existence is an important issue for the Corinthians. When Paul finally gets down to talking about this in some detail in 1 Corinthians 15, one of the things that he does is he talks about the new body, the spiritual body, if you will, made up of what we might today call the fifth element. That is, the ancient periodic table was much smaller than our one. It had 4 elements. I'm sure I'll forget them. Fire, land, air, and water. Did I get that right? Yeah, that's 4, right? And then the fifth is, quote unquote, the fifth element. If you know the movie The Fifth Element, then forget that. The fifth element is not love, as Hollywood wanted to say. It's the stuff the stars are made of. It's the stuff the celestial realities are made of. And so when Paul wants to talk about what it will be like to be bodily in the age to come, he says we'll be like the celestial bodies, like the stars. The kind of thing you actually begin to get already in Daniel chapter 12. And that you also find in the Greco-Roman literature. So it seems to me that what Paul is saying still is bodily existence here, bodily existence there, continuity, discontinuity, not quote-unquote soulless existence. In fact, the soulless body that he describes in 1 Corinthians 15 is what we today live in. I would translate that loosely as a body outfitted for this world versus a body outfitted for the world to come. And so we're still dealing with bodily existence. That's an important issue for the Corinthians, and not only for the Corinthians, because Paul wants to say that the life you live today has consequences for the life to come. So there's not this separation of life, quote unquote, life in the body versus life outside the body in the age to come. This world actually makes a difference. So the bottom line is, I'm not ready to go down the road that we want to go, but it is a road that a lot of people have taken.
Yeah. So just a further bit of word about what you take of God, the personal attributes of God. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I have no problem saying that there's God and there's everything else. So I don't need to make a comparison between how God gets stuff done and how humans get stuff done. God has his way, and God has created us in a different way. The divine image, then, I've tried to suggest this evening, is actually not a part of me, but in fact, an empowerment and a call, a vocation, a way of being in the world.
I was interested to see how you track down from Willis and you kind of come down to the present with these developments. What about other social and cultural influences or effects or powers even? How has that affected all of this? I mean, you did talk about films and Frankenstein and so on, but can you comment about socio-cultural effects that have brought us down to where we are today, where it seems like to many people, God and religion, not to mention Christianity, are virtually irrelevant?
Yeah, thank you. It's a huge question you just asked. I'm going to forget the question by the time I get into the answer, so stay with me and keep pushing if you like. I went from Willis right down to the present for this reason. Often when I talk with people about what's happening in neuroscientific research today, they say, well, you really can't trust those scientists. This stuff is really new. It's been around about 30 years or 40 years. And so part of what I want to do with Willis is simply say, since the beginning of neurology as a discipline, in the 1600s, this is the tack that's been taken. Now, interestingly, Willis was wrong about almost everything he said when he was dealing with localization. But that of localization has continued right through until the present. It's gotten more complicated, but nonetheless has continued. There's a book written in 1850, cleverly titled A History of Neuroscience, that says neuroscientists have gotten rid of the soul. So here's this long history of neuroscientific research that's been pushing down a certain direction for a number of years. Interestingly, as far as I can tell, biblical studies has never interacted with that. There's been, as far as I can tell, no influence from neuroscience in biblical studies. I think what's happened in biblical studies primarily is that people have largely understood that the chief influence on the New Testament is either the Greco-Roman world or the world of the Old Testament. Late 19th century, early 20th century, the Greco-Roman world. Early 20th century, up until the present, especially the world of the Old Testament. And so the degree to which the Old Testament has to be understood in terms of its holistic understanding of humanity. That's the degree to which you have to say, really, Jesus stepped outside of that world? Paul stepped outside of that world? Peter stepped outside of that world? So even though they can use, Paul and Peter, terminology that might find kinship with a Philo, they don't use his notion of rational soul, they don't use his notion of body soul dualism. And so I think that's what's happened in biblical studies, an appreciation more and more for the influence of the Old Testament on New Testament writers. You asked a larger question, and I'm not sure even how to begin to address it, but I can say this. If you look at what's happening in my country right now with an election, you can see the ease with which people of faith should not be talking about politics. It's an amazing thing to say, but it makes perfect sense if your view is that religion has to do with the inner person and not with the outer person. Spirituality has to do with the heart and not with how I buy groceries or what car I drive or for whom I vote, etc. So the kind of influence that we've had from Descartes and company for these years, it seems to me, has come home to roost in the US at least with a body-soul dualism that works itself out as Christianity is for my internals, but not for my externals, not for my public life, not for my business life, and apparently not for my political life. It's a safe thing to do, isn't it? To come to Canada to talk about the U.S. I was telling Don and I saw a cartoon yesterday at the airport in Minneapolis showing a barbed wire fence between Canada and the United States, which Canada had just put up to keep all of the U.S. people who will be trying to get out of the U.S. and come to Canada if a certain candidate wins. You can fill in the blank.
That was the promise during the last election. We will build a wall with the United States, and we'll get the Americans to pay for it.
Anyone else?